Hello, everyone, and welcome to Literary Ladle. I'm Teresa, and I'm here and I share book reviews and conversations with authors, illustrators, and creative minds behind the stories we love. Today, I'm joined by my friend David Perry, an illustrator, animator, character designer, writer, and the creator of Mallory Bash. He's also the illustrator of On Nuts, written by Max Beaudry, and we're going behind the scenes at Foodtopia to learn how David brought peanut jelly and his deliciously imaginative world to life. We also will talk about his journey into animation and what he's creating next. David, welcome to Literary Ladle, and I'm so excited to have you on here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
How did you first get into animation? And was there someone or something that made you realize you wanted to become an artist?
Well, so I professionally, I would say I'm more in comics than animation, but it's funny, I always wanted to be in animation. That was my goal since I was probably like, I don't know, I'd say I could go far back as 5, but certainly 10. Probably the biggest reason for that is because when I was growing up, I mean, we grew up really, really poor actually. Just had to write a letter about this not long ago. But and so we moved around a lot and we were in and out of motels and things like that. And so it wasn't easy to keep like we never really had like video games for very long, right? So moving in and out of places, it was easy to keep like a pencil and some paper, some copy paper. And so no matter where we were, if we were in like a motel or something, we could watch cable because hotels and motels have cable. So I spent a lot of my time watching cartoons and just trying to like just drawing because it was the easiest and most efficient way to entertain myself over longer periods of time when you're moving around a lot. I'd say that's what started it. I actually got into comics because Max Beaudry, the writer of Aw Nuts, he already is in animation. He's a Nickelodeon writer, and he found my stuff on LinkedIn, but he always wanted to get into comics, but found his way into animation. And we kind of joke every once in a while because I always wanted to get into animation, and I found my way into comics. And so, yeah, that's basically how that whole thing got started. But I do teach animation and illustration and comics at Indiana University and at their downtown campus. So yeah, I am kind of doing both to some degree.
I want to go into kind of the heart of your story, especially with Mallory Bash. I think that is the best, I think, example of amazing animation and just everything, right? So before Mallory Bash and On Nuts, what were some of the earlier projects that helped you find your voice and style as an artist?
Nobody's ever asked me that before. So I would say what would be the earliest one? I know in high school I worked on space pirates, and that's something you can see on my professional portfolio too. We haven't done anything with it. Oh well, that's not entirely true. The very first thing I ever pitched was Space Pirates. This was back in 2008, and it was on New Year's Day. And what happened was my friend Matt, who was the guy that worked on it with me in high school, this was after high school, but he was my best friend in high school. We created Space Pirates together. A lot of them were doodles on the back of church guest cards while we were, sitting in the sanctuary. But we came up with this whole world and stuff, and we came up with the whole cartoon idea. But his parents had, we lived in Indianapolis, but his parents had moved to Atlanta, so he moved with them. So I went down to visit there for a little while, and as it turns out, William Street is the production building for Adult Swim, and we knew it was in Atlanta. So we went looking for the building, and as it turns out, there's two William Streets in Atlanta. One of them is like a normal regular road or whatever. The another one is like this little tiny little secret road next to the highway. And we went to the wrong one first, and then we went to the one next to the highway, and we found the TBS building based on like the William Street logo. It's like, oh, that's the building. And it was New Year's Eve, and it was at night. And so well, it was actually throughout the like afternoon and the evening, and we spent a lot of time on this. And we kept trying to find a way to try to get into the building, but it was closed because it was a holiday. But if we went down to like the front doors and it was locked, so we couldn't get in. So we went. The building is kind of like a split level where you can kind of walk up this asphalt driveway to get to the roof because it's like a 3-story building. And so we went up and we looked around. We didn't go all the way around, but we looked around and didn't see anything. Couldn't find a way in, so we went back down and just kind of bummed around for a second. And then I decided to go back up and really like scan the whole roof and see if we could find a way in. As it turns out, we went around a corner that we hadn't gone before, and there was an elevator there. And so normally, me and Matt talk about this a lot because usually he was the one that wanted to do crazy stuff, and I was the one who was like, I don't know, man, this we could get. And he tried to convince me not to do it, but I hit the button while he was talking to me. And so the doors opened, and we went inside, and we went into the Adult Swim building on New Year's Eve into New Year's Day. And we were like just roaming around the building because we could hear people in the distance, so we knew somebody was there. And eventually we got stopped by a security guard. And the security guard was like, "What the hell are you guys doing here, man?" And we were like, "Well, we have a cartoon to pitch." And he was like, "Well, we can't accept," because I had a package with like all the pitch material in it. He's like, "Well, after 9/11, which, it was almost 10 years prior to that, he's like, we can't just take random packages." I was like, "All right, well, if I show you what's inside, is that okay? I'll stand here. So, if it blows up, we all die." And he was like, "Yeah, sure." So I showed him what was inside. He saw that it was just drawings and stuff. And he went and got a guy named Duke Aber, who was, at the time, tells you how long ago this was, working on, I believe, the DVD material for the second season of Venture Brothers. And so Duke was a cool dude. Like, it never went anywhere, but he sat there and listened to the entire pitch and gave us feedback on it, which was really cool. And the coolest result of that event was a few years later. I can't remember how many years later, when Aqua Teen Hunger Force did the second version of their series. I think it was Aqua Unit Patrol Squad 1. I believe it's the very first episode of that new series. At the end of that episode, Master Shake is pitching a bunch of these cartoon ideas and TV show ideas to a TV executive, and the last one he pitches before the executive slams the door in his face is Space Pirates. So yeah, that was like the first major thing we ever did, and had like one of the coolest. Like, when you get made fun of on Adult Swim or Aqua Teen in particular, like, it's like a rite of passage. So we felt pretty good about that.
Oh my gosh, there's just so many things that are like going through my head right now. Just the idea that it's sort of like you secretly got into pitch for your story idea. They put it in to one of the other kind of animations is amazing. And it's like you said, it's a rite of passage.
I wouldn't even have known about it because I was so busy at the time. I wasn't watching the new series for Aqua Teen, but I wouldn't have known about it except somebody on the Adult Swim forums had messaged me, because I had told that story on the forum like a year or two prior to that, and they were like, "Hey, did you know that this happened?" And I went and watched the episode. And I was like, "Holy crap!" So that was pretty cool. Yeah, that was probably the biggest project. If there were any other ones, I would say, this doesn't even really count, but I did think of when me and my brother, I'm going to be seeing him later today, actually, to help him fix his caved-in roof. But when we were kids, we shared a room, most of our lives, and we used to draw together all the time. And we had this somewhere. I still got them probably in my closet there, actually. We used to make these copy paper comics, and it was Daffy Duck, but it was Daffy Duck as Super Mario, and we had this whole cast of characters, and we did like 3 or 4 like 20-page comics that were all just super Daffy-o, and I still got them because they, you don't want to get rid of something like that. But yeah, but that one doesn't really count, I guess, to some degree. But Space Pirates is definitely the big one. I had some other ones that I played around with, but like Scratch, and Intelligent Life, which is like a kid's show. Scratch is more of an adult-oriented anime. Intelligent Life is a full-on like mid-90s kid cartoon kind of thing to it. All those are you can see the pitches for them on my professional site, so all that information is available.
When you're creating a character and when you're thinking of, okay, you're basing it on your own past and then you develop it. I like the fact that you mentioned the 90s because I'm full in 90s, like early 90s. Like, I appreciate that kind of animation, especially the Daffy Duck and the Wile E. Coyote. That was, even though it was like back when our parents were young, then it became popular again when I was a kid.
When our parents were kids, we were watching those cartoons. They were from their parents' generation because the Looney Tunes episodes, those were shorts before Warner Brothers films in the 30s and 40s, and to some degree the 50s, but mostly the 30s and 40s. And then they got repackaged for like children's blocks of television.
You've worked in animation and character design, storyboarding, comics, and writing. Do you have a favorite, or does it depend on the project?
I'm really bad with choosing favorites of things because I'm a left brain. Weirdly enough, I'm more of a left brained thinker. So it's like, okay, if you ask me for my favorite thing, you gotta like, okay, do you mean like a kid show or like an adult oriented show? Do you mean like Western animation or do you mean Eastern animation? And so like I have a favorite like in each of those categories. Is it comedy? Is it action? Right? Like I like Seinfeld and Friends. I like both of those shows for very different reasons. But if I had to choose favorites, like I would say, I think the best children's animated television series that was probably ever created, all things considered, I got to go Rugrats. But Avatar's a really good one too. Those two are some of the best that we've done, and for very different reasons. If I had to go with an adult animated series, King of the Hill's definitely up there. I grew up on The Simpsons and still love The Simpsons to this day, at least the first 8 to 10 seasons, but that was some of the best animated adult television that was ever created. And so at best they might be tied, but King of the Hill is just so good from beginning to end, and there's so much to love about that show. And even the continuation of it, the more recent one, seasons 14 and with the upcoming 15th season, fantastic. There's never been a better like late stage continuation of a series. Like they've done such a good job with it. If I had to go with anime, if it was for kids, I'd say probably Dragon Ball. I think. I haven't thought about that one as much, but I'd probably go Dragon Ball. If as far as for adults, man, my favorite is probably as far as television series go, it's Cowboy Bebop. As far as films go, easily Paprika. Paprika's not just my favorite anime film, it's probably one of my top 5 favorite films of all time. I wrote an entire term paper on Paprika when I was in college in LA. And that was pretty cool because like I broke everything down and like psychologically I could in that movie and ended up being like 3 times as long as the requirements. And the professor said that he is probably only given out a handful of perfect scores, and I got one for my deconstruction of that movie. I teach animation and comics and stuff, but the very first 2 courses in Intro to 2D Animation and Character Design, the first one is nothing but hero's journey, and I don't talk about it the way they talk about it in film school, where they go through the 12 that you're used to. I've read the book, the original book, Here with a Thousand Faces, and we break it down mythologically as if it's a history course or a course on mythology, because you need to understand that because there's so much human psychology behind it. And then that's what the second session is about. Before we start drawing or anything, the second one is all about human psychology. We talk about Jungian archetypes. We talk about the Big Five personality breakdown. We talk about a few other things. But if you want to be like, you can do a lot of really good work without knowing that stuff. But if my goal is to make you better than everybody else, you have to have some understanding of how people function in order to write characters.
Yes. And that's the same way in writing. You have to do a lot of research and a lot of outlining. And
Yeah.
we're going to move on to one of my favorite topics, which is talking about Mallory Bash. So I want to talk about that because this is a world and character that you've spent years developing. Where did the original idea come from, and what keeps you drawing back to Mallory?
So the original idea came from my ex girlfriend Brittany. We're still friends and all that, and we're on good terms and all that. But she was sort of the random inspiration for it. This was one of the times I tried to do something that I've almost failed at every time, which is originally I was like, I just want to create some goofy little character that can buzz around and do weird things, and it'll just be fun, right? But I found out with Mallory in particular, because I tried it before and failed at it. It was fine while I was working on it, but I got bored with it. Like, and I need meaning, right? If I'm going to stick with a project for a long period of time, I want to feel like it means something. But it started because I just created this little like caricature of my girlfriend Brittany, and it was weird in a weird way. It was almost like a daughter between the two of us because she has mostly like her traits, but a few things that she got from me. Like from Brittany, she has a temper and she loves heavy metal and sci-fi. Like those are things that Mallory got from Brittany. From me, I would say she got the sometimes debilitating dedication to be maybe honest or something like that. Like I have to watch myself sometimes because I don't. I'm adamant about making sure that if somebody asks me a question, I'm not beating around the bush. I'm not telling them what they want to hear. I want because there's no use. There's no use in that. But that can be problematic sometimes. But and the gap in the teeth. You don't see it now because I had Invisalign, but I used to have a pretty significant gap in my teeth, and that's where Mallory gets the gap. But yeah, so that was how Mallory started. And originally she wore like a spacesuit. And she was just it was kind of like Spaceman Spiff from the old the Calvin and Hobbes comics, where she was just zipping around space and like murking space mutants, and that was just the fun, goofy like strip comic story or whatever. But eventually I got bored with that, and so I just continued to develop it, and I was like, I want the exploration thing to stay, so I kept that, and I just put it down on a planet. And at a certain point I was like, okay, I'm just going to make it modern times, and I just kept sort of like whittling it down to the most important parts of it that made it what I thought was good, and then built something much bigger around it. And then so that was the first sort of, I would say, span of development for it. And the second came, and it's funny you should ask me this now because I just did karaoke a few nights ago, and my KJ has a song that I can't find anywhere else, and I was so excited because it was the song that inspired the entire Dreaming Tree story. And it's the reason that it's called the Dreaming Tree Saga is because the song is called The Dreaming Tree. It's a Dave Matthews Band song from Before These Crowded Streets. And the tone of that song, the story is not related to Mallory at all because it tells a couple of stories in that song 2 or 3 stories. But the tone of it, I mean, I've always loved that song, and so that's how Mallory developed into this very, I mean, it has a lot it's like a lot of comedy in it too, but it's definitely there's a cerebral aspect to it, and it allowed me to do the type of story that I just absolutely adore. It allowed me to explore a type of story that I love, which is stories that, and maybe it's because the way I grew up, but it's stories that where children have to enter sort of the adult world earlier than most kids have to, and have to deal with it in ways that are can be very confusing, and you're just, well, maybe not deal with it, but navigate it specifically. I think for some reason I'm fascinated by those types of stories, and that's what happens in Mallory, right? And with Mallory, it's not just a regular space either. I mean, she's dealing with, and it's all about truth, and that's how that whole story is what's based on, is the effect of not telling people the truth, because the lies that started, and they were well-meaning lies for the most part, there was no maliciousness behind them, but the knock-on effects of that over the course of a decade, and actually a little bit longer than a decade, created this mire of horrible problems that now Mallory has to unravel and deal with, and she's the one that's doing it because she is, like I said, just adamant about always being honest, like to a fault being honest. She has a bit of an attitude about her, and she's young, so it can come out in, in ways that don't make people particularly happy. But she's not lying, right? She feels this way, and so that's what you're going to get. But that's why she's the character for this. She's like all else be damned, she's going to figure out what the truth is. And in this story, it's her having to realize for the first time in her life that even she is susceptible to lying when the truth is unbearable. And that's a big turning point in that story. In the script that I wrote for it, is there's only one time she lies in that script, and it's like that crossing the Rubicon, point of no return. The stress has finally gotten to her, and she has something that she is desperate to believe, and that's so she has that lying moment, and then she has to undo what she lied about, because it gets her friends in danger. But yeah, that's sort of the progression of it. It developed from something kind of goofy and fun into, like, if I'm gonna continue working on this needs to be like a masterpiece kind of story. I want it to be something that no matter how old you are, this is going to be important, right?
Did you also develop it based on, like, inspiration from other comics or movies or things like that as well?
I wouldn't say I developed it based on other comics, because maybe something that, even though I teach comics and that's where I'm successful now, that actually wasn't a big part of my life growing up. I mean, I had some comics. I remember really liking the Sonic the Hedgehog Archie comics. I couldn't afford to get comics growing up, so I didn't really collect them. I didn't have books or comics. I had some things, but not a lot. So TV was the accessible medium. But I would say, as far as inspiration goes, like for style and storytelling, and to be honest, I'm all over the place. I mean, there are things in Mallory that are, and you can see it in All Nuts too. When you're reading through All Nuts or you're looking at Mallory stuff, you can see stuff in there, and people have pointed out from time to time where it's like, this is somebody who clearly watched Invader Zim or read like Jonan Vasquez comics. And that is absolutely true. That was somebody. I would say. Matt Groening, Simpsons and Futurama, that had a huge impact on my sense of humor, because one of my favorite things, probably one of the reasons I love Simpsons and Groening work, is because if there was like one major, like, just adorable, and I mean that literal sense, adorable trope of that type of humor, and it was almost like it's not that he created it, but he definitely popularized it. It's that anything that can go wrong will go wrong because the world is a miserable place, even if it doesn't make any sense at all. And I always think of that episode of The Simpsons where it's called Homer the Smithers, where Homer takes over for Smithers, and he's Mr. Burns' assistant, and he's trying to make breakfast for Mr. Burns, but it's Homer, so he just keeps failing. So he tries to cook something, and it catches on fire, tries to bake something or whatever, catches on fire. But the last thing he tries to do, he just gets a bowl and puts cereal in it, and pours milk in it, and it bursts into flames. Like that kind of stuff, like just the absurdity of Murphy's Law, right? And so that definitely had an impact on my sense of humor. Just how bad can things get? How absurdly stupid and contentious can the universe's power, come against you? And so that had a big impact. Those are probably the two biggest ones. Other than that, I would say, things like Cowboy Bebop certainly had. Cowboy Bebop, Evangelion, those are ones that, and Paprika, I would say those are ones, and then Charlie Kaufman films, those are the ones that I would say had the most inspiration as far as how much I appreciate exploring psychology in whatever story I happen to be telling. I always joke around with people who ask me what kind of books I read or whatever, because it's like, and they're literally right next to me right here. You can't see them, but they're there. I've got two shelves of books right next to me, and the top shelf is all comics and graphic novels and stuff that I've gotten since I started doing this kind of work, just to study it and read more. And the bottom shelf is, what do I got here? I've got Nietzsche, I've got Kant, I've got Aristotle, Jonathan Haidt, Dostoevsky. Like it's there's no almost no middle ground in my bookshelf between cartoons and comics and philosophy and psychology.
We have a lot in common because I can see that because I am the same way. You'll see, obviously, because I write middle grade fantasy, so I'm kind of obsessed with Tolkien, Thomas Aquinas, or like any of those kind of themes. I have like there's no middle ground. It's just like polar opposites, but they help. Exactly. Yes, so we have Marcus Aurelius in our house too.
Yeah,
We love
I am.
Marcus
I
Aurelius. Well, this is so much fun. We're gonna transition now into talking about On Nuts, obviously, because that's a huge project. I know you just released the first book back in, was it November? When you first received the story, what went through your mind? Did you immediately picture peanut jelly and Foodtopia, or did this design take time to develop?
I would say the aesthetic design took a little bit longer to develop, but when I read the script, I immediately like, this is a 90s kids cartoon, and it had everything that you want, and that's why I wanted to work on it. It was like, it had everything that you want in a 90s kids cartoon. I don't know how many people think about this stuff, but I think about the structure of animated shows all the time. And what makes it that thing is, okay, and when I say these things, you'll notice that you find them in really popular cartoons, which is, okay, you've got a very distinct world, and it's like thematic and iconographic. And I mean that, like SpongeBob's a good example of that. Every little bit is its own gimmick, and on their own, those aren't that interesting. But when you put them all together, you have an icon, right? And so SpongeBob, it takes place underwater. And so you have the underwater theme, but then you also have the way that everything is designed, because everything like the daisies that they use for the clouds and stuff in Bikini Bottom or wherever in that world. Those are icons of SpongeBob, the way that they draw clams, the way that they draw coral. Those are all icons. And so you have the world that they live in, which is unique and sort of themed. And then you have all of the individual iconographic design work. There's a lot of different systems for comedy, but in SpongeBob, it's interesting because it's basically the old like Abbott and Costello straight man comedy or idiot sort of duo, except your two main characters are both the idiots, right? And then Squidward is Abbott, and so but even between SpongeBob and Patrick, like there's a gradation there where if Squidward's not in the episode, SpongeBob's probably more the straight man, and Patrick is always going to be Costello. And so they have those dynamics as well. But yeah, and so it's about identifying what type of show that you want to make. But that's what happened in the 90s. You had a lot of those kind of cartoons where it was just like, okay, when you think of Rocco's Modern Life, you think of the gimmick of Rocco living in O-Town and everything is kind of warped and stuff. But it was even though it was a kid show, it was a commentary on not what was modern in the 90s, and that's a lot of what Rocco dealt with. And then you got Ren and Stimpy, which was a parody of 1950s cartoons, right? Because that was the aesthetic of it. They never say this, but it basically takes place in the 50s because it was that sort of like Red Scare. Everything is like they're predicting what the future's supposed to look like. All the ads for ridiculous products, but psychotic because it's John Crifalusi and Spunko. But every one of those shows had something like that. Doug had that same thing. Doug's is harder to nail down, but it's definitely there. The Blufftown, like all the characters having weird last names, like it had its own thing. Hey Arnold was the same way. Took place in the city. Everything is city based. He had a really cool bedroom at the top of a building. You have to have those things, and On Nuts had that. It was like, okay, this is the theme. The broad gimmick is that they're all food characters, right? So they all live in a world. Everything's food. You can have fun the same way that you do with SpongeBob, where it's like, well, with the one we're doing right now, book 2, we had to address, well, they're going to a party, and at parties there's food. What do these people eat? They are food. So, those kinds of fun things. But then one of the first things I knew that I wanted to do when I was designing everything was, okay, we have to establish a style first, and then we also have to establish icons. So the peanut that you see on the cover, that was the first one. Like we have to have an icon. But then I also had to be like, okay, there are other things that aren't literal icons that are iconographic. What are those things? The crumbs, the way that I design crumbs, those are like the daisies in SpongeBob, right? Every time you see that crumb, you're gonna know that it's from Aw Nuts because of the way that it's designed. It is itself an icon. And I try to do that with so many things, like the way that the city's built. It's all Max wanted to make sure things weren't literally like made of food stuff in the city, but they needed to resemble food stuff. So a lot of the skyscrapers in the downtown area of Foodtopia look like refrigerators. They're vaguely designed like refrigerators. And if they have like a satellite on top, it's a spoon and a colander, like that kind of stuff. So everything had to have that iconographic element to it. And every little element of designs like that, it's like, okay, if this comic has a texture, what is that texture? Because even that people like they internalize it even if they don't realize that they do it. And so that's what you do when you're trying to create the world of like an animated world is make it feel like its own place and do such a thorough job of it that anybody who's reading it when they step away from it, it could be years later, they feel like they can navigate that space on their own because nostalgia, what really works hard on nostalgia, what brings that back is that they feel like at any given time, without having to literally watch the cartoon or read the comic, they can navigate that space. I know for a fact one of the things I love about The Simpsons and Rugrats is that in my head I can walk around those houses. I know where every room is. I know where the beds are. I know what the colors are. I know if I wanted if somebody like had me walk into the Pickles residence and they asked me to go to Grandpa's room, I would know where to go. I go straight ahead, I go up the stairs, and his is the first room as soon as you get to the top of the stairs. I like to live in the space of the worlds that animation creates, and so, yeah, that's important to me.
I like that. And you brought up some iconic animation, like I'm thinking 90s. My go-to is Animaniacs because, like, I think all kind of artists they have that go-to where you mention where you step into the character and how they live and where they go. Because when I think of that, I think of the Warner Brothers Tower where they have they live literally in the Warner Brothers.
Oh, yeah, and, whenever I talk about Animaniacs, which is a great show, I always kinda refer to it as, it's basically that one Looney Tunes animated short, Hollywood Steps Out, but as an entire series, because that whole Animaniac series is basically just the writers and animators at Warner Brothers making fun of Hollywood. That's what they do throughout that entire show.
And then I always thought it was the most hilarious thing, because and that one is just so iconic. I actually got the Foodtopia book for Aw Nuts because I wanted to obviously look through it and stuff like that. And when I was looking at the animation, it kind of gave me that nostalgia of 90s and somewhat Animaniac when I was going
Yeah.
through it.
Well, if you follow me on Instagram, you've seen that I definitely am a Warner Brothers person. I mean, a lot of the times when I go and just do random sketches, I'm drawing Looney Tunes because 'cause they're just so much fun to draw.
So we'll just continue going on and talking about Foodtopia because it's probably the best. It has, we mentioned like the distinctive look, and I like that you didn't just stick with, oh, well, this is food related. It has some food related, but it doesn't scream, okay, this is all food and this is a town based on food. Right. So it has a very distinctive look, and there's so many opportunities to have fun with food inspired character. How much creative freedom did you have, and what was the most enjoyable character or part of that world to design?
I had absolute creative freedom on the design of everything. The characters, the world, everything. Max had very minimal notes. Basically, he said, just don't make, like, when it comes to the characters, of course, they're food. When it comes to the environment, try not to make everything like made. This isn't Candyland. And I think he was absolutely right to make that decision because you don't want it to be so gimmicky that it's like every time he's like, I get it, everything's made of food. So I think that was the right decision. And also it begs the question of like, if they are food and everything's made of food, are they just like making stuff out of each other? Like, you want to stay away from that. But I had absolute creative freedom from Max to design. I think basically what he did was he wanted to see what I would do and then he would adjust in my head. I'm assuming this is what he did. Then he would think he would adjust his notes accordingly. And I think he was just so happy with most of what I was doing. He still had notes, from time to time, obviously, but he was so happy with what I had done with the concept. I'd say probably one of my favorite compliments Max has given me because it means a lot to me is he said, one of the things he likes about working with me is that he doesn't need to overly explain what he's picturing in his head when he gives something to me. When he gives something to me, almost without any issues at all, I know what he wants. Like I know what he's going for. And I think that comes from being from being somebody, an illustrator who and a writer who puts a lot of importance professionally on versatility, like understanding what makes any individual thing good, not just what makes cartoons good, but why is Animaniacs good in a different way than The Simpsons is good, right? Like you have to be able to navigate that space if you want to be somebody who can be hired on a multiple projects. But yeah, so I had complete creative freedom. I had a blast. I mean, it takes time and it can get irritating because it's just art. But but I had a blast trying to figure out, okay, I've got to design an entire city, which means I have all these buildings and they can't all be look like refrigerators. So what am I going to do? So it's just like, okay, well, the skyscrapers will be refrigerators. In my head, I was just picturing, okay, if I'm in a kitchen, what am I looking around at? And this, what helped is when me and my brother were kids, we used to like look around at our room at the shelves and stuff, or the living room or the kitchen or whatever, and we would imagine it like a city. And like when you're looking at the shelves of a bookshelf, those are apartments, right? And so when I did the design for Foodtopia, I knew I wanted to try to keep things mostly kitchen based. So like there are apartment complexes that are kitchen cabinets. They're sort of vaguely designed like kitchen cabinets, but they're designed like kitchen cabinets. So you have the kitchen cabinets, you've got some things that are built like so one of the characters, the Domans, they live in a bread basket. It's a couple of donuts, and they live in a bread box, right? And so that's really all it is like, okay, it's the balance between this is a themed world, but I don't want it to be like ham-fisted and, sort of heavy-handed. Like, I don't want to, it may sound strange, but in the illustration, I don't want to brag about how gimmicky the show is, right? And so you try to find that balance where it's there, but it's not distracting, you know?
Yes, exactly. You wanna make it funny, but you don't want it to be, like, so obvious, or sort of, like, tongue in cheek when you think about it.
That's another thing. So I think there was another part of that question, which was who are my favorite characters to design. I'll get to that in a second. But one, and me and Max talk about this in almost every interview because I love doing it. And Max is obviously the writer, but he gives me complete creative freedom on what little jokes I want to put in different places. And I always pitch them to him. And so far he's only denied two of them, and not because he didn't like them, but because he was afraid that they were going to be too grown up for kids. And one of them I knew he was going to deny, but I wanted to make him laugh, so I sent it anyway. And I like to point it out to the grown ups when they're flipping through, and it's like, see this little building here? There was a time when it was first drawn that was a strip club. Like you wouldn't know it unless you were really looking for it, because I grew up in the '90s. When I did the character design, the spotlight for the Muffin Lady and her cats, I actually had to send a text to Max, and I sent him a picture. I was like, okay, look, I grew up in the '90s, so I grew up on Ren and Stimpy and Beavis and Butthead. So you've got to, is this too much? Because if in that design you saw there was a cat licking itself in a little sensor bar. And I'm like, I would have found this hilarious when I was a kid, but I don't know, like, is this okay? Can I give something like this to kids and parents will be fine with it? And he's like, do it, just do it. He thought it was funny. So all those sign gags that you see in that first book, that's all stuff that I was able to do myself. And you get that somewhat to a lesser extent in book two because they're not all around the city, but you definitely get it in a few spots. So yeah, I think that's one of my favorite things to do is hide those little ridiculous sign gags. I grew up on The Simpsons, so there's going to be sign gags any opportunity I get. But I think as far as my favorite characters to design, I'll tell you this. So in the first book, my favorite character to design, and I say this because when I was finished with the character, I was like, it's perfect. I'm never going to be able to do this again. And that was Kiwi Cat, the little mangy cat that looks like a kiwi, right? I drew that one time on the page and I was like, this is I'm never going to be able to do this again. Now, thankfully, he created that other character, the crazy cat lady. So in the second book, I get to draw a bunch of them. But that was my favorite, I think, design from the first book. The second one made something very interesting to me. So at the end of the first book, there's that little character spotlight on Lord Cherry, right? And he was a fun character to draw, not as fun as any of the other ones. But in the process of making this second book, where he's the main villain, I am having an absolute blast drawing Lord Cherry. Because he has a Squidward-esque sort of personality. It's kind of like if you mixed Squidward and Mr. Krabs, because he's obsessed with money too, And so, but his expressions and his like just deadpan, leave me alone, like why I'm surrounded by idiots, like that is a really fun character to give expressions to. So the relationship, my favorite thing to draw in the second book so far is the interactions between Lord Cherry and Scoop, which is the little ball of ice cream that is his like assistant. Ah, it's so much fun.
I love that you don't make it obvious, but you make it funny, and it's like those kind of things that make and add to a story. Because if you're from the 90s, you get it and you're like, this is hilarious. Like, especially if you're like a parent and you're kind of flipping through the book for your kid and you're like, oh my gosh, somebody is from the 90s, you know it.
One of the things that's really important to me is one of the complaints I have about modern writing is the writers don't trust the audiences anymore. And so you get these shows where I'm a huge Star Trek fan, but I swear, man, sometimes it seems like Discovery and Strange New Worlds and Academy, like those newer series, it seems like they wanna make a tongue-in-cheek joke, but they're afraid the audience isn't gonna get it, so they, like, foreground it in a really awkward, like, winking at the camera way. It's like, "I get it. It would've been funnier had you not, like, tried to make sure that I understood it." So, yeah, like, that subtlety is I think is really, really important. You lose a lot of comedy when you feel obligated to highlight the joke, you know?
You were mentioning Abbott and Costello, and I remember I grew up with that because my parents are boomers, obviously, and but their parents would watch like from even before that, right? And so we would watch the one, I forget what the name of it is, but it was the one where they're going on a train and they have like the sacks, you know what I mean? I don't know if you remember that one.
It's
And
been
then
a
they're
long.
trying to get the bread and like there's like a mouse or something that takes the meat or out of the bread. So it's like the comedy, like I'm hungry, and so it's the humor to that, like, oh, I've got to eat, and then they can't because then someone has the bigger piece of bread, and it just adds to that. We need more of that.
What we need to do if we want more of that is we need to get more people. We need to get more modern writers who actually want to indulge in where it all came from. Stuff like Abbott and Costello or Red Skelton or even the Three Stooges or certainly the Marx Brothers, like or Buster Keaton. Like if you want to know if you want to do slapstick comedy or even like Abbott and Costello did both, and they did slapstick comedy and conversational comedy. Their most famous one wasn't slapstick, it was Who's on First. I think what got lost more than anything else was timing. Comedic timing is in a weird place right now and has been for a while where it's like I'll be watching a cartoon or even a TV show and I'll be like, "That's a good joke, but I'm not laughing because you didn't know how to execute it." And it's like if so much of it was the timing. You even had a good comedian or a good actor that could have done this, but the timing is really weird. You waited too long, or it just didn't work out, even though it should have been a funny joke.
What was it like collaborating with Max Beaudry, and how did the two of you work together to blend the story and humor with your artistic style? Do you have a story you've been wanting to write but need a little help bringing all the pieces together? StoryRise is a writing and story planning app built by writers for writers. It gives you one place to write, organize your characters and story world, keep track of plot threads, share your work with beta readers, and prepare your book for export. And for romance writers, make sure to check our upcoming writing events and subscribe to our newsletter and podcast. We will be announcing our romance writing contest soon, and we can't wait to share more with you. Visit getstoryrise.com to learn more.
I love working with Max. Honestly, if I had to pick one thing that I love working with Max the most about, and I've told him this and we've talked about it a few times, is how much creative freedom he gives me. And I think we have a good relationship because I know that this is his cartoon. Like, this is his thing. He wrote it. This is his world. And so whenever I have an idea for it, and that I'm not going to make him feel bad for declining something that I pitched to him, because ultimately it's his thing. But so whenever I have an idea for something, I'll pitch it to him, and if he denies it the first time, very, very, very rarely have I gone back a second time and been like, "Okay, but I'm gonna push this one more time." And I think it's happened maybe twice. And one time he took it, and one time he was like, "No, I wanna keep it out," and that's fine. But he knows that I'm not gonna, like, push it, and I'm not gonna like, my pride's not fragile, I know who's primarily who created this thing and all that, so and I'm fine being in that space. But he also gives me an enormous amount of creative freedom. He trusts me absolutely, and so many of the ideas that I've pitched to him, he's put in there. And so and even if it dropped to like 50 or 60%, I'm still not gonna like make a big complaint about it because it's still his creation. But we have that sort of relationship where he knows there's not going to be any contentiousness for me if he denies something that I think is funny. I think you need that if you're going to have a good partnership. Yeah, I would say that's probably the what I like about the most about the relationship. He found me on LinkedIn and wanted me to do character designs for this wasn't on Nuts. On Nuts came later, but I because I did probably 4 or 5 different projects for him prior to Aw Nuts, where I was just primarily designing characters and maybe a little bit of world stuff, but it was pitch material for cartoons that he wanted to pitch to his bosses at Nickelodeon. We did one called Palm Leaf, which was the first time I did a comic for him, and that got released on Tapas and Webtoon. I know it was on Tapas, and that got popular really fast, and so, he liked the way that we did that, so that's why we did Aw Nuts the same way. Because originally Aw Nuts wasn't supposed to be it wasn't planned to be a graphic novel that was gonna be released to the public. It was gonna be pitch material to for Nickelodeon. But by the time I finished it, it was like, you have a graphic novel. It's 92 pages. So he self-published it. And then about, I think it was like 4 months later or so, Papercutz picked it up. And so it was nice for them because the comic was already done. All they had to do is, get a better letterer because I'm not much of a letterer. Charles Pritchett is our letterer and he does a fantastic job. I was so glad when they brought him in and they sent the stuff back. I was like, this is so much better than what I was doing. That's how it started. I just did some projects. In fact, Max right now is on his own series, YouTube series through Nickelodeon. He does the Teeny Mutant Ninja Turtles. And one of the earlier projects he had me work on was him and Cisco's idea for that. I did some character designs when it was still going to be like a Flash style animated 2D show. And so I did some early character designs for that. But yeah, so he's been working on that for a while.
Before we wrap up, what else are you working on? And where can everyone follow you and keep up with your latest projects?
Right now, Max and I are working on a couple of other projects. I don't know how much I can say about them. One of them I really, really, really like. I think it could be something like a masterpiece for him because it's a very meaningful project. While All Nuts is fun and ridiculous and like, there's a lot of great stuff in it. This particular project is very close to Max. It's a somewhat autobiographical. It's fantasy, but there's a big, big autobiographical element to it. It's a boy and his dog story, and I'll leave it at that at least. But it's got tragedy in it. It's very, very meaningful, very, very well structured. I'm excited to be a part of it. But there's that. We are working on a couple other things. Mallory's on the back burner a little bit right now, but I've already written a 2.5 hour film script for that, so I'm comfortable with letting that settle for a little while and then go back to it to edit it. So I'm always working on Mallory, but I'm also working on, like I said, the second book for All Nuts. I'm working on some pitches for another a children's book with a guy named Max Bach, and he's a Netflix writer and director. He did What Happened on Monday, and so I'm working on a children's book with him that I'm really happy and excited about. If you like Animaniacs, the illustration style is pretty close to Animaniacs. That was part of the inspiration for the expressions of the characters and stuff. But I'm working on that. Scratch is kind of on the back burner. Space Pirates is on the back burner. I'm working on one called Pie Girl. You can see the information on that on my website as well. That one I'm really excited about. That'll be a graphic novel. That's more of I would say a YA to adult storyline. Really, really fun, really, really action-packed, but also has like a sort of a meaningful story underneath it. The one-line pitch, and I hate one-line pitches, but they do work. The one-line pitch that gets people immediately interested in Pie Girl is I'll just tell them it's a lesbian revenge fantasy. And it is, but it's a cautionary tale. It's not romanticizing that you should do lesbian revenge. It's a character study, but the world is kind of like Mad Max, but with food trucks. So it's a bunch of food truck vendors living in the outlands and the badlands, and they're trying to gain access to the big gleaming city. And so they have to go into this basically like no holds barred death race, and in order to do that. So and then there's the underlying story. But that's Pie Girl. I'm really excited for that one. I'm hoping that one takes off. I got about 10 pages sketched up for that for proof of concept. Other than that, I'd say the one big project that I'm working on is a book of poetry and flash fiction. I've got that ready. There's a whole different like trying to get a book of poetry or flash fiction published is a really weird, like its own universe sort of bear. But I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing according to both of my agents, which is just keep submitting it to this publication and that publication. I have a pretty good track record. I'm surprised because you always hear about people who they'll send out 50 to 100 submissions and like they won't get anything accepted or get one or two. I think total right now I've sent out 24 submissions and 4 of them have been published, which is a pretty good track record. My proudest achievement, I think, of even all those, weirdly enough, is that I have only submitted 2 things to the New Yorker, and they both received tiered rejections, which is like, if they respond at all, they liked it. And it's like, we think this is good and publishable, but we had other submissions that we decided to publish. And like that meant a lot to me. Like I didn't feel bad about that at all. I felt really good about it. And it's the New Yorker, right? So it takes them like they get 1 million submissions and it takes them 6 months to get through all of them. And then if you get a tiered rejection, that means something. But yeah, and then I've had some other ones published. So it's just about building sort of your clout as a writer. And then eventually when they see how much you've gotten published, then it's like, well, maybe a publisher will take on the book. And I'm totally patient on that because the longer it takes, the more poetry I can write and the better the book can be. So, not too worried about that. But yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. You can find me on Instagram. My handle is David Perry _ Illustrator. That's my handle on Instagram. And then if you want to see my professional stuff, you can go to davidperryportfolio.com. Or if you want Mallory specific, she's on that website too, but she has her own website, and that's literally just mallorybash.com. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, David, for coming on and for joining the Literary Ladle. It's been an amazing conversation, and looking back at your creative journey and learning how Peanut and Jelly and the rest of Foodtopia made their way from an idea and onto the page. So thank you so much for coming on today, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for inviting me. I was glad to be here.
If you love picture books, chapter books, middle grade, and YA, hit subscribe and join me here on the Literary Ladle. I share honest, thoughtful reviews and book spotlights.